Okay, welcome everyone. Lots of people on today's webinar, which is fantastic to see.
Hi everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Lots of people coming through the door still, so we'll give it a minute or two to fill up the room, and then we'll kick off shortly.
As always, let us know in the chat where you're dialing in from, because I always find it fascinating to see where in the world you're dialing in from today. It's always really interesting.
Absolutely. Who's going to win the prize today? And what is the prize? Belgium, first off.
Oh, lovely.
Oh, Bruce, we know you're in North London.
Gonna put me in.
Come on, there must be someone further afield than Belgium and North London.
We had a session this morning with a bunch of a new cohort on the EX space for our EX fundamentals, and bless them, someone had dialed in from Nevada, and it was, what was it, 4:30 in the morning, Lee?
Wow.
Oh,
no,
4:42, yeah, absolutely.
So we're gonna shift the timings around to sort of work for them. But I thought, wow, that's, for me, anything before 5 o'clock is the middle of the night, so I don't do anything before 5 in the morning. And even that's early.
That's impressive. That is.
It's commitment, isn't it?
The only thing I know from years of being obsessed with American politics is that Nevada, which is a swing state, likes being called Nevada.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's like an A rather than an R. Nevada.
We'll get that right next time then. I'll say
Nevada.
Nevada.
That's right.
Yeah. Napoli to Nottingham we've got Maryland in the US. Brilliant. Okay. How are we looking, Katie? Shall we still got people coming in?
There's still a few people joining, but I think we can probably make a start.
Let's get going then. Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome to our latest EX Space webinar, which is all about finding joy at work in the hybrid era. That's clearly a subject that's resonated, given there's so many of you on the session today. A few quick housekeeping points before we get into it. If you can mute your mics, your end, please, that would be brilliant, just for sound quality. If it looks like most of you have already discovered the chat functionality, but please use that throughout the session. If you want to make observations or record a question there, we'll have plenty of time at the end for questions, and you can either do those verbally, or if you drop them into chat, we can ask them for you. We're recording the webinar, I should say, at the start. If you need to drop off at any point, you'll be able to watch this on demand afterwards. We'll get a link out to you with a link to our YouTube channel. And for those of you that are members of the EX Space, you'll be able to watch it within there as well. Quick introduction. So I'm Lee Smith. I'm one of the co-founders of the EX Space. For those of you that don't know the EX Space, we're the membership-based learning community for employee experience and engagement practitioners. So we launched earlier in the summer. We're really about enabling the EX era. So we provide a range of tools, templates, diagnostics, learning, reports, research, but most importantly, learning. We have a number of masterclasses and also bite-sized sessions, which are all about equipping and enabling you as practitioners to make a difference and improve the world of work one experience at a time. My background's 3 decades in this business now. Started out within internal comms in a corporate world in financial services, then crossed to the dark side and did another kind of 15 years or so running an agency called Gatehouse in London, now part of Gallagher's growing employee experience practice, and then got together with Emma, my co-founder. Say hi, Emma. Last year, and we hit on this idea to launch the EX Space, and yes, the rest, as they say, is history. So Emma's on the call today, my co-founder. Also Katie, say hi, Katie, who's our chief puppet master, who makes sure Emma and I are doing the right things and everything's running smoothly. And last but not least, we're joined, of course, by our very special guest today, Bruce Daisley. Say hi, Bruce.
Hello there. Hello, everyone.
So I'll just give you a little bit of background for those of you that don't know Bruce or haven't heard him speak before. He's one of the UK's leading commentators on the world of work. He's been published in the Washington Post, Harvard Business Review, the Wall Street Journal, the Guardian, and lots of other places. He's the author of 2 books, The Brilliant Joy of Work, which I think was that 2019, Bruce, around then?
It was the before times.
Pre-pandemic, back in those hazy days when Theresa May was Prime Minister, I think. And also Fortitude, his latest book, which was described by the FT as the best business book of the year, which is a fantastic read. So Bruce is going to pick up on themes from both of those books, I think, during the session today. Bruce is the founding member of our advisory board of the EX space as well. We'll be announcing more of the names and the folk that are part of that in the coming weeks, but we're delighted to have Bruce on board. Bruce has been through it in terms of work. I remembered rereading The Joy of Work, Bruce, that you started out right at the bottom, as we all did, I think, cleaning rat poo in a restaurant at some stage in Birmingham. Is that right?
Burger King, that was Burger King. I think it'll probably get away without saying that now. Yeah.
Fantastic. But progressed rapidly, and Bruce was previously the most senior employee for Twitter outside of the US, leading their European operation, as well for Google, YouTube, and others in recent years. And he also runs the #1 Apple podcast, business podcast, Eat, Sleep, Work, Repeat, which is a highly recommended and absolutely brilliant podcast to listen into. So there's a lot of things we love about Bruce. He's one of the most vocal critics of the world of work, but his criticism of often the broken world of work is always accompanied by really practical, often quite simple ideas that we can all implement to change our workplace and make radical change. He's very evidence-based, and that really chimes for Emma and I, in that Bruce always underpins his views and his thoughts with robust research, and he's also really generous about sharing those academic and other gems that he uncovers along the way. As you'll soon discover, he's got an amazing sense of humour. His books aren't just packed with great insights, but they'll have you giggling away as you go too. It's very entertaining. There are a few other writers, I think, brave enough to have the awful experiments of the Roman Emperor Frederick II on one page, and then the effect of stress on the creative process for the US rock band, The Strokes, on the next page. It really is quite a roller coaster of an experience to read one of his books. And also, last but not least, he, like me, is a Brummie. He's from Birmingham, the second city here in the UK. So it's good to have another friendly Brummie accent on one of our webinars for a change. So you're in for a real treat, guys. I'm going to shut up now and hand over to Bruce to tell us all about how we can find more joy in work.
Thanks, Lee. I really appreciate it. And just to give a shout out to the EX space, in fact, when Emma and Lee sat me down and talked me through their plan, I thought, wow, this is just an incredibly timely moment to get involved and to create something that I think is in a highly required space, but to bring some expertise to it. So I was thrilled to get involved.
Thanks.
So listen, what I'm going to talk today about is I'm going to really sort of give a perspective on some of the themes that we're seeing in work and how we might personally take steps against them, how we might be thinking of employee experience. And there's a lot of contradictions. In fact, if there's one thing that we know that characterizes the world of work at the moment, is you're kind of asked to believe two things at the same time. I'll give you a perspective on that. Well, right now we're asked to. I should say before we start, if you do want my slides, in the unlikely event you do want my slides, I'll show this QR code at the end, and you can get the slides there. So that's just a cautionary note. So we're asked to believe two things at the same time. Here's the first one. Well, there was a bit of work done by KPMG published about 3 weeks ago now, which said It's an international study, broadly similar numbers. I've seen that we've got some people on the call from Maryland. We've got some people on quite a lot of people from the UK. So that 2/3 of chief execs believe that by 2028, so 5 years time, 5 years time, by 2028, we'll be back in the office 5 days a week. Right. That's a really interesting piece of data because at the very least, while I'm not convinced that's the case, gives you a really interesting perspective of where chief execs are coming from. The other thing that if we're going to believe two things at the same time, 90% of workers don't want to go back to the way it was before. And this presents a fundamental challenge, I think, for a lot of us as we're thinking about work and workies right now. How do we reconcile those two things? Bosses probably at their heart want to try and enact a bit more control, bring people back to the office, see people right in front of them. The rest of us have sort of debated and recognized that, we feel a bit uncomfortable about that. I always think of this. I always think of this quotation. Shonda Rhimes is probably the most accomplished drama writer of the last 20 years. So Shonda Rhimes has written Scandal, How to Get Away with Murder. She's written Grey's Anatomy, Bridgerton, probably most recently. And I love this thing that she said, because it sort of gives you a perspective. There's no one more accomplished than Shonda Rhimes in the world of TV drama. And yet she said this, she said, whenever you see me somewhere succeeding in one area of my life, that almost certainly means that I'm failing in another area of my life. What I love about it is because it actually teleports us into the heads of a lot of people. A lot of us who've gone through this sense, through the pandemic, of thinking, actually, for the first time, I feel like I'm able to get my work life and my life in some degree of balance. You'll probably know the average British commute is about 56, 57 minutes. In addition to that, the days that we're in the office, women save on average about 15 minutes a day. I'm told that men save as much as 5 minutes a day. But we get the perspective then that on the days we're in the office, the reason why the Shonda Rhimes thing, quote, feels so vivid is that for the first time, we're no longer wrestling with this idea that somewhere we're failing at something. Poses a really interesting challenge. So that's a context. That's where we are right now. So we know, firstly, we're in a state where if any of us are thinking about bringing joy back to our own work or our colleagues' work, the debate hasn't finished. We're going to see a lot more discussion. And so trying to find things that seem to demonstrably work right now has never been more important. If we can go back to those around us saying, actually, we've improved it we've reduced our attrition rates, we've improved employee engagement, then to some extent it's going to help us win that argument, the big existential argument about where work goes next. So let's dive in and let's think about things. I think one of the things that is most important when any of us are thinking about work and what's happening to work right now is getting to grips with the challenge of burnout, largely because we're seeing such big levels of burnout, and most employee attrition is being driven to some extent by people feeling like they can't cope and they're struggling to manage the demands upon them. The Gallup Workforce Survey gives us some interesting pointers on this. And they did an analysis last year. Gallup Workforce Survey, we're all familiar with it, the age-old analysis of the world of work. And, always worth reminding yourself of the key findings of the Gallup Workforce Survey. 11% of British workers are engaged in their jobs. I'm always, just being respectful of attendees who are in the US, I'm always intrigued why the numbers of engagement are so significantly higher in the US than UK, whether that is whether healthcare is untethered from our jobs in the UK, and so it sort of changes things. But it's a really interesting philosophy when we are thinking about those themes of what actually makes people engage their job. Probably the one that really strikes me is fascinating is the idea that 80% of people who say they've received actionable feedback in the last week are engaged with their jobs. Right, really interesting. It comes down to sort of the notion of if we receive feedback, and I'm going to go on and talk about that in a moment because how I think we can interpret it. So let's get our heads around burnout and what the causes of it are. But look, this is from the Gallup Workforce Survey. And actually, if we're going to try and bring joy to people's jobs, understanding the things that are taking the joy out seem to be pretty important. Causes of burnout. Number one, unfair treatment at work. Number 2, unmanageable workload. Number 3, unclear communication. Number 4, lack of manager support. And number 5, unreasonable time pressure. I think someone's dropped a link into the original research in the side, but like I say, if you want that list afterwards, I'll give it to you afterwards. What Gallup say is really interesting. They say all of those 5 things you can ascribe to a single cause. I don't know if anyone wants to guess what their assignation is. When they say all of those things, I was just checking if anyone was going to be hot-fingered and put anything in. All of those things, they say, are down to managers. There you go. Judy wins the prize. All of those things are down to managers. And it just gives you an interesting reminder. I think the job of manager has never been harder because, to some extent, managers are creating the weather in people's lives. We're having a direct impact on people's sense of happiness, contentment, but it illustrates the challenge. There was a piece of work in that KPMG research that I mentioned before that said that 83% of new managers aren't given any feedback when they step into the role. And so, while we're ascribing them with responsibility, it's worth saying quite often we're not giving them the tools to get the job done. Really interesting. Worth pausing. Look, if our context today is about joy, thinking of what we can do to bring joy into our roles. Actually, there's more in that workforce survey on that. The people who find themselves in the other zone, the people who aren't burnt out but are thriving, that's the contrast. They say 95% of those people report being treated with respect all day. I love this. I'm a big fan of this next point. 87% of them report smiling and laughing a lot. Sounds nice, doesn't it? Chance to be a fine thing. Smiling and laughing a lot is a critical component of that better state of work. Now, for me, this gives us a really big context. I did a piece of work about 8 weeks ago. Actually, it was catastrophically unsuccessful. I turned up somewhere, and there was this sort of big pharmaceutical company, I think you described them as, and they had this big issue. They said, everyone here is really frazzled. Can you run a session to help them beat burnout? Okay, well, I'll give it a try. I kicked off. I said, how many hours a week? How many people in this room spend more than 15, 20 hours a week on video calls? And someone stopped me. Someone at the back put their hand up and said, I'm going to stop you there. We all spend 40 hours a week on video calls. So, okay, right, let's try and work out our route out of this. And she said, I'm going to stop you there. We're not going to spend any less time on video calls. Now, the challenge there is that you've got this problem. How do you square people are spending 40 hours a week on video calls? In fact, they were spending all of their evenings as well on video calls, and they were feeling burnt out. And here's the fundamental problem we've got, is that unless we accept that burnout is directly related to trying to use more energy than we've got, then we're going to have we can't resolve that. It's a bit like Usain Bolt turns up at your coaching clinic and says, not getting my best results. You look through his plan, he's doing 120 hours a week of training. You go, okay, you're saying, I think I've got a clue what we might try first. And the problem is that unless we recognize that energy is directly related to burnout and the use of energy, we're never going to resolve these things. So really critical. So that begs the question, what can any of us do? What can any of us do when we are experiencing that burnout, when we're at that receiving end of some of those cues of burnout? What can any of us do? It's sort of an easier thing to do to say, okay, well, just solve it. And the most critical thing for any of us is to spend a little bit of time understanding what we can actually control. One of the biggest things, Lee mentioned, I wrote a book, Fortitude, about resilience. And one of the things that comes out, actually, I'm going to talk a little bit more about sort of the elements that contribute to resilience, massively misunderstood, I think, resilience. But one of the biggest things that impacts our own sense of well-being, bar sort of no exclusions anywhere else, one of the biggest things that impacts us, our sense of well-being, is a sense of personal control. It's fascinating how big this plays a part. So you might be one of those people who opens your calendar on maybe Monday morning, or maybe even Sunday night, and looks and think, I've got back-to-back meetings all day, and it produces this sort of breathlessness in you. It produces this sense of sort of overwhelm and anxiety. It's because you don't have any control over what's happening. And we witness this. Look, you'll witness this in your financial situation. You witness this in relationships. You witness this in anything. When you feel like you've got no control, no leverage over something, it's why a lot of people find aeroplanes stressful, because you're sitting there, you can't actually do anything. That absence of control plays a really big part in our well-being. So first route into trying to discover it and get a way to have more joy in your life is working out what you can bring control over, what you can have an impact on. And I saw a beautiful example today, actually. I've written a book by a woman called Frances Fry, who sort of gone into places like Uber and Riot Games and WeWork, actually, and solved cultural problems there. And she was talking about a hotel client that they had, and what they'd realized was that quite often we're just left in a situation in our jobs where we have no control over anything. And so this firm, this hotel chain, had allowed their workers to spend up to $2,000, which seems lavish amount, but to resolve any customer issue. The Ritz-Carlton, so luxury hotel. And what they realized was no one was spending the money, but the freedom, the liberty to actually feel like they can do something was a really important part of people feeling like they could have an impact on their job. They could have some degree of agency. And this plays a really big part. This sense of control plays a really big part. Fascinating piece of work that I saw looking at nurses, attached stress monitors to nurses, heart measures to nurses. And what they did is they looked at nurses when they did long shifts. But to juxtapose it, some of these nurses had done long shifts because they'd chosen to take a longer shift, maybe to earn some money, maybe to saving for a holiday or whatever. Some of them had been forced to do the longer shift, colleague no-shows, things like that. Now, superficially, it's the same. You've just done 15, 16 hours work. Superficially, you should be frazzled, whichever one you've done. The really interesting thing is that the ones who've chosen to do it were in a fundamentally different frame of mind when they finished. They felt, you might witness this, but you stayed up late to do something you wanted to do, and it feels different than you've been forced to keep yourself attached to a spreadsheet or keep yourself attached to email. Feels fundamentally different. Plays a really important part. That agency, that sense of control plays a really big part. Now, how can we apply that? Well, firstly, the thing that quite often we see sometimes discussions of this is people say, well, it's all about boundaries. It's all about sort of trying to say to you, what can you do and what can't you do? And I think, the critical thing there is that boundaries are all about recognizing what we can control and what we can't control. So if anyone is sitting there thinking, well, how can I get more joy to my own life? Or how can I gift more joy to the teams that I work with? Allowing them to feel like they've got some control over things. I'm chatting to someone who works in Subway, the sandwich store, and everyone in Subway is given the right to give people up to 15% discount. It's autonomy. Something's gone wrong. Don't worry, I'm going to give you a discount. Someone's smiled. I'm going to give you a discount. No, they don't use it that often. In fact, in Pret a Manger, in the coffee shop, twice a day, they're allowed to gift the meal that someone wants, gift it them for free. So that might be, you've got an old woman in there, she's struggling, you take them a cup of tea over, or you take them a sandwich over. And those simple acts of gifting someone some degree of control of how they do their job, that plays a part in every aspect of our job, in the way that we can choose to operate our lives. If you've got back-to-back meetings, how can you gift someone some control over that? Now, one of the ways that you see firms experiment with this is the idea of meeting-free days. And broadly, I've never met any organization that I've mentioned meeting-free days to who say that would work here. So let's work on the basis that you're going to think, while I'm saying meeting-free days, it's not going to work. So great, that's a great start point. It's not going to work in your place, so that's great. So now we can start working out if a hypothetical company that looked a bit like your company experimenting with meeting-free days, how might they make it work? Well, the first way they might make it work is they might say, in January. So to really find out a period of time, it's a bit of a weird month, isn't it, in January? It takes about a week to get going. Everyone wants to sort of get in and out the office quickly because it's so dim and dingy. Right, you might say, in January, this hypothetical firm, we're going to experiment with a meeting-free Wednesday. You might say that. The organisations have experimented with it. Lovely piece of work done out, I think, out of Cardiff University. Lovely piece of work. And they took 70 organisations. They had to have at least 1,000 employees. So they weren't small, little sort of pet shops, ma and pa businesses. They were reasonable scale, 1,000 employees, 70 companies. What was brilliant about it is they committed to experimenting with a meeting-free day for at least 6 months. All of them reported that employee engagement went up. The people reported, actually, that was my favourite day of the week. Oh, actually, that was the day that we got things done. Because you're allowed to meet, but you're just not allowed to put it in each other's calendars. In fact, I saw something last week that the payments company Stripe has meeting-free Wednesdays. And they've set up their software, their meeting software, that no one can schedule a meeting in that time. Broadly, when these things fail, they normally fail because bosses and managers don't abide by them. That's really interesting, isn't it? Culture, how much does culture come from the top? It seems like, it's the big bosses that normally see a failure of that. So what can you control? That's one of the biggest parts of us thinking about making culture better. So what else can we say? Well, the second thing we say is that culture is about connection. If you're going to bring joy to work, then this is having a sense of connection seems to be really critical. Someone's in the chat there. Oh no, Lisa says that's okay. We'll come back to that in a sec. Meeting-free days. Culture is all about having a sense of connection. I think this is really vital for me. So Lee mentioned at the outset, I was found myself fascinated and fixated with resilience and understanding the idea of resilience. And I'll tell you why specifically is because you hear this phrase resilience all the time. A friend of mine works in the NHS, and she said she was in the midst of pandemic. So you cast your mind back, like the 5th season of the pandemic, and it was like September 2021. So you're a while in to the pandemic. We're all thoroughly bored of it by now. I thought we'd be back in the office by now. Things haven't gone the way we planned. Anyway, in this hospital, a sheet of paper went up on a notice board saying resilience webinar on Thursday. She said to me, no single sheet of paper has produced more anger than that sheet of paper. Why? Because the people who work in this hospital are like, hang on. So we've just been through this remarkable year and a half. Everyone's been working long shifts. Weekends have been cancelled. I've not been on holiday. I've not been to, quite often they've got people who family and friends live abroad. I've not seen my family and friends in a year and a half. This sheet of paper seems to be suggesting that the issue is not that this is an overwhelming time of the world that we're working in, but the issue seems to be that I'm not resilient enough. She said there's another phrase for that. It's called victim blaming. Really interesting, right? Like the idea that, any time that someone tells you to be more resilient, I saw a tweet on this. It said that resilience is silence. When someone asks you to be resilient, they're asking you to shut up, stop moaning about your problems. Can you just go and deal with your problems? Right. Now, whether that's true, whether that's not true, it's got a spiky take that. So I found myself thinking, okay, well, I wonder where we do see resilience. It's a really intriguing thing about resilience. There's no shortage of courses on it. And it's a big business. The US military is probably the biggest customer in the world. They've spent somewhere between $500 million and $1 billion training people to be resilient. And the great thing about that, the heartening thing about that is that when someone spends that amount of money on something like resilience training, there's lots of people who turn up saying, okay, well, let's measure how it works. Actually, if they've spent the money that's going to help all of us crack this, then let's research it. Fabulous thing is people have gone in there, researchers, and they've come back with a really interesting conclusion. Their conclusion is this resilience training has had zero impact whatsoever on the resilience of the people who went on it. Wow. In fact, this resilience program that was used on military people was initially used on school kids. And so people said, well, let's go and check it on school kids. And they came back and they said, we can't recommend you use this resilience program. It appears to have no effect whatsoever. Right, hang on. It begs a really interesting question that, like, when you've got limitless money, when you can spend this amount and you seek to produce a reaction and it's not doing anything, begs a really interesting question. Okay, why is this not working? Here's what I'd like to suggest to you. actually, we see resilience everywhere. We see it all around us. You probably know someone who's resilient. You probably, witnessed resilience on the news. These astonishing stories of how people cope with things. Resilience, I want to suggest to you, is a plentiful thing, but we're looking for it in the wrong place. And the best way to think about resilience is not that it's this magical thing that some of us have got and some of us haven't got. Imagine if that was the case, that Russia invades Ukraine and half the people are able to cope with it and half the people weren't resilient enough. That's unlucky. It doesn't work like that, does it? It doesn't work like that. Resilience is the strength we draw from each other, the strength that we feel emboldened by everyone around us. And these remarkable testimonies of this, if you look at the Second World War, if you look at, I was looking at people who survived the Kosovo conflict in former Yugoslavia, and what they describe is that, a sense of togetherness normally is this really protective thing. Right? Really, really interesting lesson. Now, it goes back to that point I made before, that good culture is about connection. And let me give you, again, I mentioned the Gallup Workforce Survey. Let me give you something that I think is the perennial, for me, the perennial learning of the Gallup Workforce Survey. And it's this. It's the biggest predictor of whether you're engaged with your job is whether you've got a friend at work. I usually used to use the phrase best friend there, because actually in their research, it says best friend. But some people, especially men, feel so uncomfortable in the idea that they're going to have a best friend. It almost feels like this sign of weakness that they're going to have a best friend. God forbid you're going to have a best friend. And maybe that's why most men over 40 only report having one friend in the world. But having a friend at work is what we need. Now, worth asking yourself a question. You've got a friend at work. For me, the big part of work, good cultures, the best times I had was when I reported, I thought in my head, as a group of people there who, I would love to hang around with. I would love to laugh with. But it poses a really interesting question. What we see in the data is actually something that sort of illustrates how this is changing, actually. 18% of hybrid workers report having a close friend at work. So it suggests that, connection plays a really big part. I said to you that maybe connection plays a really big part in resilience, but separately, that maybe we're feeling a little less connected than we went before. I mentioned that research before, and I'll show it again. The idea that 80% of people who report receiving direct feedback in the last week are engaged with their jobs. And I just want to put those two things side by side with each other, actually, because for me, they go to the heart of something quite philosophical. What does that mean? Well, having a friend at work or having direct feedback from a boss. I saw this beautiful phrase that I think really expresses it for me. It's phrased by a poet, a guy called David White. And he sort of trying to express, in a quite lyrical way, actually, what friendship was. And he says, friendship is the gift of being granted the sight of another and the equal gift of offering them sight of you in return. Right. Okay. Bit poetic, bit fancy. But what does it go to the heart of? Friendship is about being seen. And I think the reason why in COVID, a lot of us might have felt like we were on a Zoom call or a Teams call, and there's laughter on the call, and there's 10 people on there, but you come off the call and you don't feel seen in the same way. You don't feel like you've had the personal connection. Well, that second point sort of begs the same thing, that idea that, someone receiving direct feedback in the last week. Well, what's that about? It's just about feeling seen. And it poses a really interesting question that, if we're going to feel like our jobs are personally rewarding and professionally rewarding, feeling seen and feeling like our work is being noticed is probably a really vital component in that. It goes to the heart of, sometimes if our work is so busy and feels like we've done something and no one noticed, it's no wonder we feel disregarded, like it didn't matter. So feeling seen, both personally and professionally, is probably the most critical lesson, I think, that any of us can draw upon that evidence and that research. How can any of us sort of regard our jobs? We need to feel like they matter and that they've got substance to them. That plays a really interesting part, actually. There's something that I find really intriguing. It comes an adjacent from that. And I always think about this. It's sort of the idea of collective intelligence. The idea of collective intelligence is this. If you ever attended a music quiz or a pub quiz or a team quiz, then you'll know this sort of a fundamental thing that any team is almost without exception better than any individual. So, you might turn up, and even if you only answer one question all night, generally the collective intelligence for group means that it works more effectively than any individual separately. And there's a really interesting thing about this, because I think actually if you look into the research on this, what determines a successful team is actually that thing that I talked about, being seen. I'm going to show you something here. You can go away and do this. It's an interesting experiment. So when researchers have looked at collective intelligence, one of the things they've said is that the thing that contributes to a team being more collectively intelligent, having better results, better answers, the thing that contributes is how effectively they're able to read each other. It's why sometimes face-to-face is slightly better for some elements of this, because you can see that someone's got a thought and they're holding it back, or someone doesn't agree. You can sort of observe those things a bit more instinctively in a room. It's not to say that it's essential to do it, but researchers have found that there's a couple of ways to predict how good people are at reading each other. I'll show you this. Now, this test is called the Reading the Mind in the Eyes test. It's a strange title. If you search Reading the Mind in the Eyes, you'll get some images like this. And so if you do this test, it's got 37 sets of eyes in it. It was created by Simon Baron-Cohen, who I believe is a current cousin of Sacha Baron Cohen. Now, actually, interestingly, we'll come back to that. It was created as a test for autism, because typically autistic people find it a bit harder to read the emotions that people are giving. But what you discover is it actually has an application. Now, the really interesting thing about this, let's play this together. So the first set of eyes are the ones on the left-hand side there. And I want you to throw into the chat box. Look at that. Someone's already put this in. I want you to throw into the chat box what you think these eyes are saying. Are they joking? Are they insisting? Are they amused? Or are they relaxed? Feel free to throw that into the chat. The interesting thing about this exercise, okay, right, we're getting a few. Interesting thing about this exercise is that it's okay, we're getting a bit of a divergence. So these eyes are insisting. Okay, so we've got a few there. This is why it's so interesting, actually, because it's there's some, when you do the test, I'm going to give you a couple of health warnings on the test in a minute, so don't do it until we've talked about it. Right, let's look at the second set of eyes, and I'll come back and give you some context. So the second set of eyes are they playful? Are they comforting? Are these irritated eyes, or are they bored eyes? What would you say? Okay. Well, if you've not put an answer in yet, there's a big clue from the people who have put an answer in yet. So these are playful eyes. Really interesting thing about it. So first thing I'll say about this, it's quite a fun exercise to do with a team. But here's what I'd say. If you did it with a team, I would strongly suggest you don't encourage people, or you don't force people to share their scores. Here's what you find. People can feel a bit embarrassed. I've done it with colleagues, and there's always someone. My Irish colleague Neve got 36 out of 37, and she wanted to be carried around the office on a chair, and she ideally wanted someone to go and fetch her a cake. But while there are some people who are elite performers at it, there'll be a few people who will be like, I skipped them a few, and it got a bit repetitive by the end, and I wasn't paying full attention. And look, the question isn't that. The question actually poses us a really interesting challenge. How good are we at reading each other? And it values that. It says to us, let's try and value the way that we try and read each other. And what you discover is that the better we are at reading each other, the more effective we are as a team. Now, there's something else that comes out of that research. Do you think there's any group that is better at this than another group? That might be saying it too hard. Do you think there's any gender that's better at this than another gender? Women, says Christina. Women, absolutely. So women. So if you are interested in this, the original research that was done out of Carnegie Mellon University suggests that women are significantly better. And so their conclusion was teams that are at least 50% women seem to produce better results than teams that aren't. Right? It's a really interesting question, right? And look, as an exercise with something to do with your team, it helps you do two things. Firstly, it helps you think about how you interact with each other. And secondly, it sort of begs, actually, what do we value for team interactions? Maybe when we've got really important meetings, they're the ones where it's good that we sort of spend time face-to-face evaluating those things. So look, what have I given you there? I've given you a couple of perspectives that connection is really important, and thinking as a participant in an organization, thinking about how we build that connection is probably a really critical consideration. If I'm going to wrap up and do one final thing, I think generally good cultures have got a sense of ownership to them. And what I mean by that is, a sense that sometimes we can find ourselves thinking that culture is something that's handed to us, or that the bosses are responsible for. The example I often give, I worked with one organisation, and a receptionist changed the culture. This is in the joy of work thing. A receptionist changed the culture because she said the culture here is so terrible. No one seems to like each other. No one seems to interact with each other. All about that connection, really. And no one did anything. So she sent an email around the company saying, it's the best time of the week. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me on the center table. It's Crisp Thursday. So for our participant in Maryland, you got to think potato chips, but we invented them, so we'll call them crisps. And so there's something, and she bought some Pringles, she bought some sort of kettle chips, laid them all out on a tray in the middle, and people stood up. They had a few. Who can resist a small mini rack of Pringles? But they had a few of those. They went back to their seats. Next week she did it again. Third week she turned up as a Pringles tube, which is incredible commitment to the bit, I think. And then, but what happened over the course of time is that people started valuing it, and they realised that that person had changed it. One of the best books you'll read on workplace culture is a book by Zeynep Ton called The Good Job Strategy. I absolutely adore this book. Started out talking about retail, and her perspective of retail was, actually by laying down a few rules at the start, it seems like organizations create better cultures. What she found was, the thing that underpinned this book was, she found that organizations that valued employee experience effectively were more profitable and were faster growing than their businesses that weren't. But there's a lovely detail in the book, and she's followed it up this year. Actually, she wrote a book which shows you how to implement it beyond retail, which is a must read. But there was there was a quotation from that book that I loved, which was this. There might be a typo in this. The number one reason people stay with Quick Trips, that was one of the firms she looked at, it's not the money. It's because their managers will do the same job they will do. And I think, that sense of we're all responsible for creating a culture, and we're all responsible for feeling like we're all in this together, plays a really vital part. Probably if you think about great cultures, they often do have that sense that we're all in it together, that sense of sort of cohesiveness, that sense of mission. So what did I say? What did I talk about here in terms of culture? Like to say, the context that all of us are looking at right now is that these big debates going on, and bosses are saying we need to maybe reevaluate our relationship with the office. I think, critically, I would say that there's probably a few things we can think about doing to try and improve the experience of employees and improve the enjoyment of our jobs before we force something that could be incredibly unpopular. So let me think about those. Understanding burnout, I think, plays a really critical part. Thinking about what you can control, gifting control back to employees, thinking about what you can control in your own life is really vital. Good culture is all about connection and cohesion. And actually, as I hinted at before, that sense of connection plays a really vital part in people feeling resilient. The connection, I guess, a critical component of connection is the sense that we're being seen. And finally, that culture is a team sport. We are the culture is, I think, the most important lesson for any of us. So, like I say, listen, I think I spend so long thinking about these things and sort of reflecting on these things, and often there's no right or wrong answer on any of them. In fact, I'm chatting to that woman, the Frances Fry woman, in about half an hour, and I know that every time I chat to her, I always think, yeah, I've learned something new about that. So I think the most critical thing that any of us can do is have a sense of humility, a sense of curiosity about thinking about what we can do and how we can improve it. Now, I think we've got 10, 15 minutes for questions, Lee.
Thanks, Bruce. That was fantastic. Yeah, absolutely. We've got until the hour, so we've got 15 minutes for observations and questions. I've got a bunch, but I think it's only fair that we give people a break from the Brummie accent. So I'm going to hand over to Emma. I'm sure you've got lots of observations and thoughts on this, Em, if I can pick on you, and then we'll open up more broadly.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Bruce. That was absolutely awesome. Really love that. So many different threads going through there, and really resonated with me as my background is psychology. I'm interested, Bruce, if it's okay, and get your take on. So the conversations I'm having at the moment with a lot of people are that people like your Gartners, etc., saying, yeah, employee experience, the way our people feel at work is really important. But the reality is we're seeing budgets being cut. We're seeing teams being laid off. I know LinkedIn have laid off a load of their EX people. And I was speaking to someone just this week, well, just today actually, about whether we felt the C-suite were really invested in, improving the way it feels for our people at work. And the conversation we had was that actually they're kind of saying the focus is so heavily on AI and how that's going to change the world of work. They've almost kind of switched off the stuff we're talking about here. I just wondered if you've got any views on that. If you're seeing the same things, have you got any views on that focus or how AI is going to change how it feels at work, the future of work?
Yeah, I each week I write like some thoughts on these things. I was just reading through my notes, and I attended an event about 12 months ago with big retail store, Marks and Spencer, and someone stood up and they said they'd spent some time correlating the best performing stores, the best performing offices, the best performing teams. And what they found was that the teams that spent their social budgets seemed to be higher performing in other ways. Right. Beautiful. I was like, publish that, give someone something. And she said, actually, I can't publish it, but it just gives you a pointer and an illustration that our experience of work, of teams, of what's happening isn't just a nice to have. It plays a really critical part. And I think often we don't notice these things until maybe we don't have them. You'll know that on the website Glassdoor, so where you can review your employers, workplace culture comes out top, more important than salary and benefits. But I suspect it really comes out top for the people who've noticed the absence of it. When your workplace culture is toxic, when your workplace culture makes you miserable, that's when you're like, I've got to go somewhere that's better than this. So yeah, look, I'm strongly of the opinion that that's misguided. It's a real mistake. It's optimizing for short-term costs rather than long-term benefit. It's a bit like we've seen the reason why that discussion about return to the office 5 days a week, unfortunately, seems to sort of be proving charming to the C-suite, is that it misses so much about what goes on outside of that group. Nike announced a couple of weeks ago that they were going to have people back in the office 5 days a week. And the one thing we know is that flexibility is a diversity and inclusion issue, is that generally the people who value flexibility the most, who've got care responsibilities, parental responsibilities, they need to focus on those things, that they're going through that Shonda Rhimes consideration. And yet, leaders often take decisions in a vacuum. They say, we want everyone back in the office because that's the best way to work out that everyone's up for it, everyone's committed, everyone's focused. And what they miss is that there's a whole axis of that that doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I
added in the chat the quote about friendship by David White, the poet David White.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's, I guess, just an observation. And I know, I've been a fan of your books for years, and, as you said, you bring in all these different studies and evidence, which I'm a huge fan of. And I'm always amazed at this lack of looking at the evidence in organizations, that so many kind of practices are so outdated because whoever's making those decisions is not looking at the evidence base. Like you said, the correlation between, the experience at work and the performance has been there for years, and the neuroscience is there to back that up. And yet organizations are still making like you say, very short-term focused decisions on things that are going to have an impact for years to come. So that's, I guess, just a comment. Let's have a look at some of the questions coming through there, because we've got a few coming through, I think, haven't we?
Yeah, I'm going to jump in there, actually, because I've sent a question and it follows on beautifully to the conversation you've just had. So we're talking about C-suite. So how do you get them to buy into the importance of EX, not just because it's the right thing for employees, but because we do know it delivers results for the business as well? So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a challenging one, isn't it? Because we do know it, and because we've got the evidence for it. Anyone who's making the decision to undervalue it or deprioritize it seems like they're more interested in their own instinct than they are in evidence. And so, that begs a really interesting challenge. And look, in those situations, I've found that trying to find forums where we can discuss things and make, so what I found in the past, we had a situation at one of the places I work where that we had a high employee resignation, and with a lot of employees leaving with no job to go to. And in exit interviews, so we had like really high attrition. And in exit interviews, people said, the reason why I'm leaving is that it's overwhelming all week at work, but the emails start on Saturday morning and they finish on Sunday night. And I feel like unless I participate in the weekend emailing, I feel like I'm being judged for not being committed. And so we with the number 2 in the company, the chief operating officer, we sat down and we reviewed that. And we said, I wonder if in this room here, we could commit to try and understand what we think is contributing to people leaving with no job to go to, and commit in this room now to see if there's anything we can change. So look, it was a no power situation. None of us could bring about that on our own. And what we found was there was a fabulous discussion that followed it. It was like a really informed discussion where in the group, this real alpha chief operating officer agreed, hey, what we need to do is we need to email less at the weekend. It's like, right, okay, someone write that down. Someone write that down and put his name next to it. And then what happened was about 3 weeks later, he started emailing at the weekend. It's like setting the dogs running. And someone replied to him, oh, Anthony, just a quick one. I think we agreed in that meeting that we were going to try and avoid weekend emails. I wonder if we could try and close that thread. And anyway, he was a little bit confronted with his own decisions, but he said, yeah. So he replied, correct, that's what we're going to do. We're going to close this down. Now, I think what that illustrated to me is that sometimes to try and get agreement in a public forum about something that we might feel is instinctive, at least can try and make people feel like, okay, I did say this and we were going to try and be more consistent. But the challenge, of course, is that, if we don't have the power over these things ourselves, sometimes it's a tricky one to navigate. So I've just felt trying to bring things to debate forums and trying to either make people confronted with the consensus of opinion, or make people feel like, okay, we've committed to something and we're going to agree on it. I think, those things seem to, at the very least, be tactics that you might want to experiment with. So, you could say, look, this team, evidence-based discussions, to my mind, are the only thing that works.
Thank you. That's brilliant. We've got another question that's come in, actually. So, we're planning an all-in away day for colleagues before the end of the year. Given budgets, we're all going to be in the office. We generally hybrid work, 2 days on average a week. So colleagues do interact regularly, but not like pre-COVID office days where teams crossed paths more. So do you have any tips on how to make it go successfully? What sort of activities will work, sort of bringing people back together?
Yeah, I think the more that you can make it feel different and special, the better. And so that might be that you try and, I would try to optimize for conversation and reduce PowerPoint. It's really easy for you to invite people in and then they're sitting in a hall watching 4 hours of PowerPoint. And it's the stuff, it's the thing in the gaps that really. So my view would be, even if you want to do a bit of PowerPoint, I'd make the gaps really long. There's going to be a 35-minute break now. There's going to be a 40-minute break now. We're going to have an hour and a half for lunch. I would make the gaps really long. I would make sure you realize that the magic happens in between things rather than in the forced content. Try and force some of those things those interactions, those things that take place. So that might be, the things that I found really helpful are, run a big session with 40, 50 people saying, can people write down a thing that's going well right now and a thing that's going badly, and let's talk about them together. And what you find is that, when I've run that session, the things that are going well, everyone recognizes they're going well, and they're normally about the way that people are interacting with people, and the things that go badly. I think most people can recognize something that they can contribute to that make things go. But I think the more that you can energize discussion or try and make it feel special and participatory, the better. I think people have got to come away from that day, and they generally do, collective effervescence. So when we're around each other, it feels a bit more special. But the more that people come away from that going, yeah, that was good, wasn't it? That was good. Food helps as well, I think.
Yeah, everyone unites over a chocolate hobnob, don't they? So
absolutely.
There's a few more questions coming in. I'm not sure whether or not we'll have time for all of them, but let's see how we do. So another one here. As someone with a moderate disability after an accident, hybrid working made a critical difference to my return to work. Do you think companies trying to enforce a return to the office might be risking a Qualities Act prosecution?
I'm sure it's not top of mind for them. I suspect most of the people who are making these decisions aren't necessarily thinking of consequences, because what we know is that there's these multiple diversity and inclusion issues. As soon as you start forcing a return to the office, it generally, it supports a small cohort of people who have typically done well, older men, and it proves difficult for other groups. So look, I think it's definitely worth trying to vocalize your feelings on that, because I suspect right now it's probably not top of consideration. It's going to be one of the huge tragedies if we go from this era and as someone said to me, if you believe the future of work is what we used to do 10 years ago, then it says a pretty depressing thing about how we're willing to adapt and learn, I think.
100%. Thank you. Okay, another one here. Bruce, do you know of any research or surveys that's targeted to or about organizations who are working without an office or very much remote first and globally distributed? It's disappointing that even now, most of the discussions on new ways of work are centered around office design and what amenities are available to attract people back there. I can feel a bit unseen as we are not trying to do that.
There's quite a few firms worth checking out, organizations like Automatic. They've talked about it a lot. There's quite a lot of tech firms that have gone fully distributed, is the way they would describe it. I think there's interesting lessons in what they say. The organizations that go fully distributed generally talk about the importance of when they do gather. So, whether that's every 3 months or every 6 months, face-to-face contact is important for building trust and reasserting trust. I think trust is one of the things that we do find marginally easier to build face-to-face. But I would check out Automatic. The chief exec of that, Matt Mullenweg, has been quite vocal about describing what this looks like and layers of autonomy that he's seen. That gives you an interesting perspective. It's principally tech firms that have done most of the work of this, but there's quite a lot of tech firms that have published some of their outlines and how they operate, and that might be Matt Mullenweg and Automatic. It's got 2 T's in Automatic. Is a good place to start.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to try and squeeze another one in. Any tips for what to try for people who might struggle to make connections at work? So they try, but their interactions with others seem to create problems and clashes rather than connections with others.
Yeah, I think probably starting with less rather than more. So, just find someone who's got a similar job to you, or someone who does appear to be on the same wavelength as you. I think the reason why having a friend at work seems to be so helpful is it's just not nice sometimes to moan at someone or to laugh with someone or to just, shake your head at the latest request you've got. So I would suggest starting small, not trying to be a friend with everyone, but work out someone who's on your same wavelength, really, or someone who's in the same boat as you. That seems to be a sort of good start point.
Lovely, thank you. Are we okay for one more? I see we are.
I think we're at time, Katie.
We are at time. We
I'll
are.
hand back over to Lee to finish up. I'm just conscious of people's time, so I want to be respectful of that.
Thanks, Katie. Bruce, thank you so much. That was enlightening,
thank you,
and entertaining, all in one, as always. For those of you that haven't read them, Bruce's books are brilliant. The Joy of Work is fascinating now, reading it in a sort of post-pandemic world. I was going to ask you if you'd change one thing, Bruce, what you'd change, but let's cover that another time. And Fortitude is fascinating, very different to the other book, but brilliant. And don't do an MBA, just tune into Bruce's podcast, Eat, Sleep, Work, Repeat. It's an absolute education and highly, highly recommended. So Bruce, thank you.
Thank you.
Just from our side, the EX Space, we've got 2 more webinars coming up this month, public ones. The first is on the 15th of November, which picks up on one of the themes that Bruce covered, which is around empowering middle managers, where we'll be talking about our EX Space Line Manager Toolkit. So that's on the 15th of November. And then on the 27th of November, we have our next EX Files Live, where we look at a digital EX case study from Bupa, the global healthcare company. So both of those are public webinars. Please tune in if you can. Keep a lookout in your mailboxes. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you for your questions and input today. And as always, this will be recorded and available for a catch-up if you want to. Thanks, everyone. Have a cracking day.